Hello everyone, we are finally up and running. Okay, so my name is Amir Aryani. I work for Australian National Data Service, and I'm going to give you some introduction about a kind of initiative called Scholix. From my perspective, we are also one of the participants in this project. So I'm not a leader of this project, and to some level, my information on this one is a bit limited. And also, to be honest, this is actually the set of slides was designed by Dr. Adrian Borton from ANDS for a webinar, it's a 1-hour webinar. So I had to actually cut this to see what I can fit in 20 minutes. So let's see how far I can do, and my apology if I had to skip some slides. So the Scholix come from the necessity that we had in the sector for finding out what is connected to data sets and publications. And we found that a number of our partners in repositories, in universities, publishers, they all have some information, and they are sharing those information through the bilateral agreement between themselves. For example, Nature shares the list of publication link articles with certain journals and data repositories. Dryad does the same thing for certain journals. And it would be very difficult for a repository like a Fedora or DSpace to go and collect all of this information in one spot. Now, this is kind of a bit of narrative to this. Let's assume that there is a repository or the registry. In this case, I would probably say Research Data Australia in ANDS, and we actually have a data set. And then we have there's another journal publisher. There's a publisher somewhere else that has an article, and that article actually has a link to this data set. So if you get a researcher comes to our portal and wants to know, okay, well, this is the data set, what is the link to this? The connections to that particular journals and all the other relevant journals is a value add from the data repository perspective to the end user. Now, this can be more complicated when you have multiple repositories. And the result of this would be lots of, if you like, data service pipelines that you have to build between these systems to all of them exchange data between them. So the same thing happens for journals and also for service providers or software providers in that domain that actually provide a service to the end user, to the researchers. For example, a researcher goes to the Scopus. I will actually have a screenshot of this one later on, that you see the paper, but you don't see the data set that's linked to that. So there's the same interest for journal. Journal wants to know what other data sets are in the repositories connected to this. Okay, so Scholix was created as a working group in Research Data Alliance about 2 years ago. We had actually 2 versions of this working group. The first working group was basically bringing all the publishers and repositories who were interested in this and trying to find out what we want to do. 18 months later, they came up with a prototype that the idea was we are going to create hubs. So these pictures were reflecting that perspective, that there are going to be some hubs that collect the data and the community can read data from those hubs. Now, in the second generation of that working group, now we actually have a particular Scholix hub that's hosted in the service that we call DLI, Data Literature Interchange? I don't know actually. These abbreviations, you always need to know what they stand for, especially if you are involved in the project. But we call it DLI portal. And the DLI portal, which is a part of the Scholix group, is actually collected data from, actually that's a picture of this. So data literature interlinking. That shows this is not my slides, otherwise I should have known that this comes next. Okay. So what I was going to say is, yes, I was looking for a list. Okay, this is a list of all the institutions right now who are involved in this DLI portal and put the information into that portal. If I go back, I should be able to find a number. So we have about 17 million contributed links to this pool, if you like. Now, these are the individual citation items, and one of the problems, like for example, in ANDS we had from the first version of this prototype was we were harvesting information from different sources, like Pangea, and we say, okay, well, Pangea has a data set, and data set has a link to other data sets or articles. Now, The problem was in the original metadata, there was a big XML object that says this is a description of this, and that every single related item was a insert items into that big XML. So you technically can end up with the XML item that be more than 2,000 lines. And that would fail over the OER PMH, and we had a bunch of other problems for harvesting those data. In this second generation, we're just going for the atomic links that says this DOI is linked to that DOI is linked to this DOI. So there is no aggregation at the research object level, if you like. And that's how we end up with this 17 million, if that number is correct and the slide is valid. Now, so this is a page for the Research Data Alliance Working Group. If you are interested in getting involved in this project, that is probably the best way of doing that. We will have, well, usually we have 4 meetings per month, but this is based on the different time zones and different participants. So you can hop into the meeting that's relevant to your community. Okay, so this is a bit about the metadata model for this. It's actually very, very simple. It's basically it's connecting 2 different objects, and we basically collect the minimum information that says object A is linked to object B. It's all done by identifier. So you need to have some kind of identifier, accession number, DOI, something that says this object, what it is, and I can resolve this DOI somewhere. As I this identifier somewhere, doesn't have to be DOI. But not having a DOI have certain problems that I'll demonstrate later. Okay, so I believe that we have 2 examples here. One is that there is a data set, and there's a journal, and from the journal article, we are looking for a data set. So in this case, in a Scopus, there is an article, and in that article, now a Scopus is actually harvesting the data from the DLI hub. And yes, so in the Scopus page, you can see the related data, and that record actually in this particular example comes from the Australian National Data Service. There is a bunch of other things around this. It is kind of a new initiative. There are things that we're still sorting out. For example, here, the record should not say what still we are not quite clear on the terminology, but Australian National Data Service is actually a provider of the link, not the custodian of data. So in this case, we believe that the data should represent what the link should go to the actual repository, not the publisher of data sets, but that's how the system works right now. Now, there is another scenario when we have, for example, a record from GenBanks, and this record actually, as it is, has a link to a whole group of articles in PubMed, but that is just only a subset of links to these data sets. If we go to this article on Elsevier, you actually would find a link to that record from GenBank. Now, that pair is already in DLI, so if you are using the DLI Scholix portal, you would be able to find those links. Now, how we actually get information into this system, and I believe later on there is a slide about how to get information out of that system. So to get it into this, there are a couple of different ways. One of them is that in the data site metadata, there are the related objects that you can identify, and that information goes into the Scholix hub. There is the same thing for Crossref, that you can actually identify the related items to your publication. And, which I'm the most familiar one with this one, we have the concept of related information. So if you actually provide us with a data set, you can see these are the list of journal or articles or publications that are linked to this data set, and then when we get this information, we push them into the DLI portal. That's an example actually on Anne's Research Data Australia page, where a data set, at the bottom of that you can see there is a related publication with DOI, and that link actually goes to the DLI portal service. The other option is that if you are a separate repository, you can actually contribute this to this pool of links. So for example, we have examples here, the data site does it, Crossref does it, OpenAir does it. That yellow box can be you, can be your institution, can be Fedora, for example, that actually push the information to this pool. And the metadata schema is on GitHub. It's very, very basic. So you can basically do the crosswalk from almost anything. So with a simple XSLT, you can actually create the records you need for contribution to this. Now, how to get the information out of this? Well, there is an API that's been just launched recently. I tested this a lot because okay, so this was designed as an alpha system, and then we went to the beta prototype. But at the beta prototype, some of our partners said, oh, it's a great idea, let's just integrate. And then when we did the integration, we found out, okay, well, not everything was working as we expected. So that's how the beta software works. It's not designed to be production level, but now it's out there in the wild and people are using that. So I actually have to use this API a lot to actually debug the system, find out for this DOI why the link is not in Scopus, so try to trace this back. But it's working, so that's a good side of this. You can actually read all the data from this if you don't want to use OAI-PMH. The other thing I wanted to mention here is the event data from Crossref initiative, and the data side also involved in this. So event data is a concept that you actually have a data element on internet, and then you try to trace it around the web to see where it is mentioned. And Crossref actually doing this in a very large scale, that are looking for connections to DOI in the Twitter, in the Stack Exchange data, into the WordPress, all the places that you can actually find the link to that particular item. Now, one aspect of it, so that was kind of a much bigger project, but one aspect of this event data is finding the DOI connection. So where data site DOI have a link to the Crossref DOI. And that information now by, I believe, both Crossref or data site doing this, or one of them doing on behalf of both of them, but that information also goes into the DLI service. So there is a Scholix.org website. You can actually looking at this, and majority of information that we have is here, and list all the partners in the project. I don't know if that would be easy to write, but I believe the links to the both RDA, Research Data Alliance page, and also Anne's link. We have actually a page that explains how this DLI service works from perspective of Australian institutions. All of them will be available on the Scholix.org website. And the best contacts for this will be Dr. Aidan Borton from ANS and Natasha Simons from also ANS, and two of my ANS colleagues who are more expert in this field.